Ethical Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good morning. Welcome to this week's edition of Ethical Perspectives on the News. My name is Craig VanSandt. I teach business administration at the University of Northern Iowa and hold the David W. Wilson Chair in Business Ethics there. We're talking about something very timely today, reviewing the presidential debates that have just taken place along with the one vice presidential debate. As you are undoubtedly aware by this point, we will be electing a new president in just over a week. This has been one of the strangest campaigns in history, certainly that I can remember. And not only are the two candidates among the least liked candidates in history, they're also polar opposites in just about every conceivable way. I don't want to get into the particulars yet. I'd first like to introduce you to our panelists, many of whom you will recognize. First, we are privileged to have Bob Rush, a former Iowa State Senator and an attorney with Rush and Nicholson here in Cedar Rapids. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Thank you.
Our second panelist is Frank Durham, an associate professor of journalism and mass communication at the University of Iowa. Thank you for coming back again.
It's a pleasure.
And finally, our third panelist is David Bullwinkle, a professor of philosophy at Kirkwood Community College. David, thank you for coming on the show.
Good morning.
Thanks for all of you for being here. To the viewers, I want to first acknowledge and also apologize to each of you for the way I'll refer to all of us, is that as a bunch of middle-aged white guys, we probably do not represent the full spectrum of political views. I'm going to try and address that somewhat by assuming that we all have our preferences, our personal preferences for candidates. But I'll ask us to try and set that aside to the extent that we can as we analyze the debates and help our readers think about, or our viewers think about, what they should be concentrating on, at least in our opinions. So let me start this by asking each of you, what's the one main takeaway that you would encourage our viewers to think about from any of the three presidential debates or the vice presidential debate? Bob, let me start with you.
As painful as parts of these debates were, I do want to say that I thought lots of information came out to the viewer, a lot of information that is helpful in helping people assess who they're going to support or not support.
Okay.
I guess I'll pick on maybe a minor point, but the moderators for each of the debates were professional journalists, but they weren't working as journalists. And I think some of the commentary that followed the debates surrounded the perception of what those people were doing, but they were working as moderators to organize the debate, and they weren't really being reporters at that point.
Okay, and just to clarify, do you see that as a strength, weakness,
I think
good thing, bad thing?
It's just confusing when a nationally known news anchor shows up and isn't behaving as a journalist in a professional sense. But that's a point to clarify, and we can talk about the role of journalism further.
Okay, and I think that is something that is very important. David, what's your takeaway?
Well, I would add on to what Bob was saying. I think we got a very clear display of both the style and the command of substance of the two candidates. Intentionally or unintentionally, I think they both sort of showed themselves in the context of what is supposed to be a very serious discussion.
Okay, and if I may answer my own question from mine, the biggest issue that I saw was not actually in the debates. It was by a newscaster, Bob Schieffer, whom we're all familiar with. After the second presidential debate, he was asked by one of the news anchors to sum up the debate in one word. You'll notice I gave you guys more than one word. But Mr. Schieffer, and I'm going to quote this for you, said this: more than one word, but I would just say, how have we come to this? America can do better than what we've seen here tonight. This was just disgraceful. And I don't do his intonations justice. I mean, he was clearly saddened by what he saw in the second debate. And I've got to say, I'm actually a little surprised to hear each of you, Bob, you, and David especially, be pretty positive about this.
Well, I would say that one way to improve what we were watching during these debates might have been to give the moderator an off-on button where you could stop the interruptions and let the opponent respond, and that would bring some decorum, some semblance of order to the process. I think that would be helpful. But I think it's easy to be critical of what we did watch with all of the interruptions, the unanswered questions, the et cetera. But I think we can certainly improve upon the process.
Okay. David, did you want to address that?
Well, I didn't necessarily mean to be praising both candidates when I said that we saw both of their style and their command of substance displayed. If a wolf and a dog both run out into a field, they're both displayed there. You can see them plainly. You don't have. That's not to say that a dog is good and a wolf is bad. So I mean, these are comparisons that just off the top of my head. I don't mean to imply anything about a particular candidate, but Hillary Clinton was the policy wonk that she is. When she was given a policy question, she usually tried to answer it. I mean, there were some pivots there. In my opinion, Donald Trump struggled with the policy questions much more. And there was a lot of distraction that he introduced into the debates as well, and that produced a lot of the incivility and the breakdown of a real debate. But we got to see him. We got to see how he operates. So I thought that was instructive.
Okay, fair enough. Frank, let me turn back to your question about the moderators and the media. Can you clarify for us a little more in depth what you were getting at?
As far as I understand it, before the debates were held, the proposal was made that the moderator might act as a journalist and actually fact check in real time, or that the sponsoring network would provide that sort of interaction with the debate, and it was just determined that that wouldn't be desirable. It would have been interesting, and we can talk about decorum, and we can talk about behavior, and we can talk about calling people names and that sort of thing, but journalistically, I think what was interesting is the display of a complete disregard for truth and a complete disregard for fact at many points, and particularly on the part of Donald Trump, and the ability to counter or deny having said things and done things that were on videotape and in other locations, on network video, just really took us down a road that was a long way from an exchange of ideas about policy. And so given that journalists are in the business of verifying and triangulating and verifying facts and triangulating evidence and coming up with a current version of the truth, that was really cashiered in this particular context.
And I mean, I know there has been a lot of discussion in the media generally about truth-telling or the opposite during this campaign. Do you all see this as a general trend? Is it particular to the candidates that are currently running, or is this something that's moving in a direction we don't like?
If I can take that shortly, I think it is part of a more general trend, and I wouldn't give any one person credit for it. The conventions of evidence and making a case for truth don't hold in the broader landscape of the internet. Anyone with a keyboard can be a reporter by her own designation. And anyone who is a witness to an event can capture video, and it's not the same as professional journalism in its treatment of evidence.
Okay, which makes your job as a journalism professor either much more relevant or much more difficult. I'm not sure which.
Or maybe more interesting. But the way we collect evidence and determine what's socially true is getting outnumbered by sports entertainment and stuff on the internet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let me turn to another question. It seemed to me that immediately after the debate, each one of the debates, one of the first questions journalists turned to was who won the debate. Is that even a relevant question in a presidential debate?
Well, I would say yes, it's relevant if the goal of the candidate is to win the election. Certainly the candidate wants to claim victory, and it's up to the viewers, I suppose, ultimately to sort out if there's been a winner or loser. So I don't have any difficulty with somebody pronouncing themselves a winner or the other party a loser. I think the real check on all of that is the electorate.
And what do you mean by that, the electorate?
We can sort through, we have brains, and we can gather information. We can decide if this person is telling the truth or this person is not telling the truth. And then those that we find speaking repeatedly falsehoods, we hold them accountable at the polls by voting for the truth-teller.
Okay. David, do you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I'm hearing a lot of talk about truth, and of course, as a philosopher, I appreciate that. I'm into that. I think that truth is a key standard by which to judge candidates' performance in a debate between candidates for the presidency of the United States. But it also occurs to me that one of the candidates, Donald Trump, he's an entertainer, right? He's a real estate guy, so he's a business executive, and he is an entertainer. And the standard by which he might judge a win or a loss might have not as much to do with truth as we think it should. I mean, it might have more to do with looking a certain way or sounding a certain way, right? Speaking in a way that that motivates his base. Maybe it's more image than it is substance or truth. So the Republican Party nominated this man. A bit of buyer's remorse, because I think there are people in the Republican Party who still care about truth. Now, we could talk about that, but putting an entertainer in the job, in the role of a person who, it's pretty important that the president speak truthfully, I think. So it's a bit of a gamble. It's hard to know what's going to happen. But having an entertainer in there does seem to weigh against the role or the importance of truth as a criterion for judging the debates.
Okay.
I would surmise that politicians have historically not always told pure, unvarnished truths. Perhaps this campaign, what's unprecedented is the the number, the sheer quantity of falsehoods that have been put out into the marketplace.
Well, and I think that there is also a degree of difficulty, if you will, in the blatantness of it. I mean, we've always been used to politicians spinning things so that it isn't exactly the truth, but it kind of resembles it. And apparently in this election, there have just been numerous blatant lies.
Well, I think there's a kind of generational disconnect here, though, because the notion of winning was probably had more to do with the sort of junior high bus stop game of playing the dozens and scoring points off of each other with sharp remarks and rebukes than it did than the truth it would have indicated. I don't think that when we talk about winning a debate, that makes me think about what the stakes were. And in this case, the partisanship is so sharp and so divided that we had belief system versus belief system. I don't think that weighing evidence in an empirical fashion to determine what was true is really what was at stake as much as a kind of boxing match. If I can imagine the stakes in this circumstance, it might have been the notion that the election before the first debate was rather close, and maybe there were people who were undecided who might be persuaded to go to one side or the other. And that fell apart on style points, I think, along the way. But I want to question the idea that this was the kind of transaction we were talking about. I don't think people were necessarily persuadable in either case. It was more of a sort of match.
May I ask a question,
Sure,
Greg?
sure.
I was reading somewhere that presidential debates rarely have much of an impact on voter preferences. Do you know if that's correct?
Generally speaking, it is. And you know, when Lord Benson told Dan Quayle, "I knew John Kennedy, and you know John Kennedy," that was exciting. And I was in a Democratic Party that night, and we all hopped up and down, and it made no difference at all. So the polarization between the two parties, I think, just sort of made this entertainment in a kind of high stakes seeming reality TV more than what we thought of as a debate.
Some historians would say the Nixon-Kennedy debate was significant as far as moving some voters a certain direction.
Sure.
But if I remember correctly, much of that was physical appearance, wasn't it? Richard Nixon had a shadow,
Right.
a 5 o'clock shadow.
He didn't let him put makeup on him. And also, there weren't 500 million websites to distract you from the nightly news. And so the media system was quite different at that time. I think it was just in that year that the nightly news went from 15 to 30 minutes in the evening at all.
Wow.
So,
And Nixon reportedly won among those listening to him on the radio,
Right.
but the TV viewers thought Kennedy had prevailed.
Well, let me come back to something you said, Bob, about voters having their own minds and making, thinking through this. As I was watching the final presidential debate and Mr. Trump talked about reserving the right to contest the election, I really didn't think much about that because I figured that was Donald Trump, just doing what Donald Trump does. And that became, almost immediately after the debate ended, the major talking point for the media. And it has become a big part of that. Are we being influenced as much or more by the media as the candidates themselves?
I think the media are reacting to a convention that we inaugurate new presidents and they shake hands and hand over power in a peaceful and civil fashion because that's what Americans do. I agree. I thought that Donald Trump was just performing, and I didn't take offense at the way he said that. But I think that again, the context is different between what we expect from this process in a historical sense and what we're getting in terms of contemporary reality television and entertainment.
Okay. So again, I'm going to come back based on your answer. is this a trend, or is this peculiar to this election? Any of you?
I would defer to a historian of the media.
Well, I'm not a futurist, but the cat's out of the bag. I think that I don't think Donald Trump is a trend. I think there's one of him, and I expect that would be the end of that kind of performance. But the willingness to play fast and loose with the truth may be something that's slipping farther and farther out of our view.
Well, the explosion of money into the political process, the explosion of media outlets, I think adds to this mix of what we have for public discourse these days. We perhaps grew up with Walter Cronkite speaking facts to us on the nightly news, but now you can key into whatever you want and confirm your opinions, whether they're fact-based or otherwise.
As a philosopher, how do you combat that?
Boy. Well, I'm not sure I know how to answer that question just yet, but I'd like to come back to something that Frank said.
Very presidential.
So
avoid the question.
I'm pivoting. That's a tough question that you ask. But there's another tough question, which is the one that Frank just raised. We no longer have, this presidential debate anyway, does not seem like a contest between people who, as you were saying, they don't share the same assumptions. They are not working in a way within the same system.
Not at all.
Right? I mean, there is the Constitution, and that is the system that they are supposed to be working within, but from the standpoint of party politics, they're very far apart in style and substance. So my question is, how do you settle truth claims when the contesting parties don't agree, don't share the same criteria of truth?
Well, in the 1920s, Walter Lippmann thought that elections were a sublimation of mob violence, and that we attained civilization by agreeing to a process. I'm not so sure that we're as close to that this year as he thought we might be then.
Our feet are closer. The mob violence is
well,
not so sublimated.
Dissimilarities and the antagonisms between the two poles are so marked, and the rhetoric has gotten so hot, and the broader context of politics in the Western European and North Atlantic community is so fraught right now. I would hope we would sublimate more than not.
That would be nice. But I see your point that the conflicts are coming ever closer to the surface.
So before any media source told me that it was a big deal that Trump suggested that he might not accept the results of the election, I was on the edge of my couch. My hair stood on end. That seemed like a big deal to me. And by saying that, he, to what I hear, with a feeling of apprehension, is he is keeping a resort to mob violence in his options. He's keeping that option on the table. What would happen if he didn't accept the election results? His people, his supporters would be, what would they do? That is a question.
I think you're right, but the tricky thing there is to play both sides of the fence and to be a reality television entertainer and the politician who's supposed to be a statesman, that different audiences are watching, and the message is clear to them on their terms. So it's risky to behave like that.
Bob, you started to say something.
I also shook when I heard him say that. I've spent a number of years in election law and early years in the South, and saw all kinds of voter fraud and fixed elections and rigged outcomes. So when a guy running for president makes that statement, it just like a thunderbolt saying this guy is rejecting our system. he could have said it as he tried to the next day. I think he backed it down, tried to compare it with Bush versus Gore, etc. But I think the cat was out of the bag.
Well, this conversation has taken us in a direction that I'm guessing don't leave our viewers feeling very good. Let me ask, turning from the presidential debates, where do you see our political system going in the next couple of decades?
I remain optimistic. I think it will be very important. I think it'll be time for the real leaders in the Republican Party to stand up, and the real leaders in the Democratic Party to come together. I remain optimistic. This is a possibility.
Frank?
I think it's incumbent on Hillary Clinton as the apparent projected winner to embrace the needs and concerns of the people who are threatening to upset the apple cart after the election. I think they have a credible stake in the country, and they have concerns that need to be addressed, and it would be really important for the Democrats to pay attention.
I appreciate both of your comments. I feel less optimistic than you, Bob. It's not only the leaders who have to set their differences aside and seek common ground and make compromises and so on. We have become more polarized as an electorate. There are studies you can read about how Democrats only live in neighborhoods with other Democrats and Republicans only live in neighborhoods with other Republicans. We're a nation of immigrants. We have people in our country wanting to participate in the American experiment, less familiar with the Constitution, maybe, although with Mr. Khan, who knows, bringing their own backgrounds and experiences to bear on the conversation of our democracy. And that is a difficult conversation, but I don't think it can only, I don't see that it can go very far if it's only conducted at the level of the leaders. I think the people of the United States need to lower their guard a little bit, talk to people who are different from themselves, find out about them, find areas of common ground, maybe try to identify more narrow areas of different opinion. I think that work is possible, but it doesn't seem like the political system is encouraging us to do that very much, or the political system or the social system. We seem to be pulling back from each other rather than leaning in, as the phrase goes.
Yeah.
I'm surrounded by educators. I think ultimately you guys are the key. Educating, informing.
Well, and I think there is an element of truth in that. But please don't just leave it up to college professors. I mean, there are lots and lots of people that we all need to be getting better at being a community. This has been a fascinating conversation. I wish we had more time to do it, but we're just about out of time. On behalf of the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, I want to thank each of you for appearing on the show. Viewers, I want to thank you for spending time with us. Have a great week.